Under the fading gold of a prairie evening, Clara Whitmore wrestled with the sack of feed, as if it were the very earth itself fighting against her. Her fingers rubbed raw from rope burns, ached in protest each time she heaved, and the coarse burlap scraped against her skirt. The wagon's wheel was sunk in a shallow rut, the kind that could be coaxed free with a second pair of hands, but she had no second pair. Not anymore. From the boardwalk across the street, shadows leaned and whispered. The day's light was dying, but not fast enough to hide the tilt of smirks or the shake of knowing heads. Clara could almost feel their voices against her skin. She'd never make it, someone said. Low, but not low enough. She should sell. Better than watching her freeze next winter. Sheriff Amos Cutter stood in their midst, his stance casual, but his eyes sharp as a tack under the brim of his hat. "You keep on like this, Mrs. Whitmore," he called, "and you'll be nothing but a cautionary tale." His words, slow and easy, still landed like a slap. Sell your land. Save yourself. Clara lifted her chin, but the weight of the sack was winning, and her pride felt as frayed as the rope in her grip. She tried again, digging her boots into the dirt, the muscles in her back screaming, and that was when the sunlight vanished altogether. A shadow had fallen over her, not from cloud or dusk, but from someone standing between her and the day's last warmth. He was a wall of a man, broad enough to eclipse the street behind him, his hat held respectfully in one hand. His hair was sun-faded where it curled against his neck, and his voice, when it came, was a low, unhurried rumble, like the distant approach of thunder. "Do not mind my size, ma'am," he said. "I will be very gentle." Clara froze. She knew him at least by sight. Elias Boon. They called him the giant when they didn't think he could hear, though she suspected he always could. She had seen him in town before, usually alone, moving with an odd carefulness, like a man afraid of breaking the world around him. "I can manage," she said, though the sack's refusal to budge made a liar of her. His gaze didn't waver. "No doubt you can, but it'd be quicker with two." Before she could object again, he bent, though bent was hardly the word for it. It was more like the earth agreed to lower itself with him. One massive hand hooked the sack, and with the smallest shift of his shoulders, he swung it over as if it weighed no more than a basket of apples. He didn't grin, didn't look for thanks, just settled it where it needed to be. Her relief was immediate, though shame chased it close behind. "Thank you," she managed, and he gave her the barest nod before setting his hat back on and stepping away. From the store porch, she heard the whispers ignite again, sharper now, as if her moment's surrender had given the gossips fresh kindling. Martha Pruitt, with her prim collar and quick eyes, leaned into another woman and murmured something that made them both glance at Clara. She turned her back, pretending she hadn't noticed, though her cheeks burned hot. That night, she told herself she would avoid him, not because she feared him. Elias Boon had never given cause for fear, but because she feared what people might make of it. And so, in the days that followed, when she saw his tall shape moving across Main Street or standing in the livery's shadow, she looked away first, busying herself with any excuse to pass him without pause. The land, however, didn't care about town gossip. A fence rail split under the last hard wind, and Clara meant to mend it herself. Yet when she went out at first light, hammer in hand, the work was already done. The post stood straight, the rail fitted neat, no tools left behind, no footprints to prove who'd been there. But she knew. She stood for a long moment in the quiet, the dawn still pale and tender, wondering if she ought to be grateful or angry at being silently helped. The answer came later that same day, when a sudden prairie storm barreled inwind, sharp as knives, rain slanting in hard sheets. She was chasing the milk cow across the yard when she heard her name over the roar. Elias Boon emerged from the gray curtain, soaked to the bone, one hand steady on the rope halter that kept the cow in check. "Yours, I believe," he said, pushing wet hair from his brow. His voice, even in the storm, was calm enough to steady her pulse. She muttered her thanks and, without thinking, invited him in from the rain. Inside, the house felt smaller for his presence. She poured coffee, and he cradled the cup in both hands like it was something fragile. The steam curled between them, carrying the faint smell of roasted beans and wet earth. They spoke little, just enough for her to learn he lived out beyond the cottonwoods. Alone. When the storm eased, he left without asking for anything, without even shaking the water from his coat before stepping back into the rain. That night, Clara dreamed of her late husband. In the dream, he was mending the fence, his back to her, but when she called his name, he turned and she saw Elias's face instead. She woke with tears wetting her cheeks. Restless, she stepped onto the porch. The storm clouds had moved on, the moon hanging like a silver coin over the prairie. In the distance, a figure walked away from her slow, unhurried, as though satisfied with his watch. She didn't call out. She only stood there, her hands curled around the railing, the cool night air brushing her skin. She could not name the feeling that rooted in her chest at that sight. It was not yet trust, nor was it the full warmth of safety, but it was something quieter, steadier, the knowledge that someone was watching over her, without asking for the keys to her door, without demanding the coin of her pride. In that moment, beneath the sweep of the prairie sky, she understood that there were kinds of strength she had never been taught to measure on, that perhaps she was not as alone as she had believed, and still, she wondered what price the world would ask for such a thing. Spring came with a wind that smelled of thawed earth and damp grass, but with it arrived trouble that cut through Clara's cautious hope. Sheriff Cutter was waiting near the well in town, his thumbs hooked in his belt, his eyes like the edge of a rusted knife. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "Deadmen'll be ridden through soon," he said. "Word is they got orders to clear off what can't pay. You can't pay." The words settled in her gut like cold iron. "I'll manage," she said, though she wasn't sure if she believed it. "You'll manage yourself into a ditch," Cutter replied, spitting into the dirt. He tipped his hat with mock politeness before walking off, leaving her to the scrape of whispers from passers-by. She turned toward her wagon, only to find Elias Boon standing there, his hat low, his eyes watching her with that same stillness. "She had come to recognize her enough to know you could use a hand," he said quietly. She didn't answer right away. Pride made its last stand in her throat before slipping away. "I could," she admitted. From then on, he was at her place most mornings. They worked without fuss, planting rows of beans, setting posts, hauling water from the creek. He never told her how to do a thing, never reached for a tool in her hand unless she offered it. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't, but the silences between them grew less like walls and more like the space where trust might grow. The gossip, however, bloomed like weeds. Martha Pruitt was overheard saying Clara was trading favors with the giant. Others hinted she was keeping him fed for more than his work. Clara bit her tongue until it bled, but the shame pressed against her ribs all the same. One afternoon, while they rested by the fence, she let it spill. "They're saying things about us." Elias drove the point of his knife into the dirt beside him, looking out toward the horizon. "Let them talk. Wind don't hurt stone." It was such a simple sentence, but it clung to her like the smell of wood smoke, steadying her in ways she couldn't name. But steadiness has a way of being tested. The sun was slipping low when they heard hooves on hard ground. 3 riders appeared at the edge of the yard, strangers, dust-coated with eyes that weighed her and found her wanting. One swung off his horse, the smell of sweat and stale tobacco clinging to his coat. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, grinning without warmth, "we've come to discuss your land. We'll make an offer you can't refuse." "I'm not selling," she said, her voice even. The grin thinned. "Now, that ain't neighborly. See, we've got papers saying you owe. And when folks owe, they pay or they get cleared out." The second man dismounted, stepping close enough that she could see the dirt under his nails. Wouldn't take much to move you along, he said. His hand closed around her arm, fingers biting into flesh. Before she could react, a shadow fell over them. Elias stepped from behind the barn, silent as snowfall. The man holding her glanced up, then barked a laugh. Well now, look at this. You bringing your big man to scare us. Elias didn't speak at first. He simply placed one of his hands, enough to cover the man's forearm completely over the grip on Clara's arm. With a slow, deliberate motion, he peeled the man's fingers away, the tendons standing out in his own wrist. He didn't squeeze, didn't shove, just turned the man's hand loose and let it hang in the air like it no longer belonged to him. You've had your say, Elias said at last, his voice low but carrying. Now ride. The men shifted, their laughter gone brittle. The one who had touched her stepped back, rubbing his hand as though it ached. Ain't worth it, the third muttered, and they mounted up. In another moment, they were no more than a dust trail moving away from the sun. Clara's knees felt hollow. She gripped the fence rail, breathing hard, the echo of their presence still ringing in the air. Elias didn't move toward her right away. He stood where he was, watching the horizon until the last speck of them was gone. When she finally looked at him, she saw not just his size, but the restraint it took to hold it in check. He could have broken them, she knew it, but he hadn't. That kind of strength was rarer than iron. She stepped closer, her hand finding its way to his chest. The heat of him, the solid thud of his heart, grounded her in a way words couldn't. They stood that way, the prairie wind tugging at her hair, the sky bleeding into twilight around them. The dead men never came back. Word must have traveled about the giant who guarded the widow's land. Gossip still flickered in corners of the town, but it no longer carried the same sharpness. When she walked into town beside Elias, people looked twice, but she kept her chin high. One evening, as they finished the day's work, Elias lingered by the porch. The sun was gone, but its memory still burned low in the clouds. You'll be all right now, he said. She didn't answer right away. She knew the words she wanted to say, but they felt too heavy to lift. Instead, she nodded, letting her eyes tell the truth. Her mouth couldn't yet form. Much later, when she lay in bed, she thought about how easily the world could mistake quiet for weakness, or sighs for threat. And she thought about the man who carried both like burdens he had chosen. If she ever told this story to anyone, though she doubted she would say this. Sometimes the gentlest hands are the largest, and the fiercest protectors are the ones who never have to raise their voice. And she would leave it at that, letting them wonder just what it means to be protected without being owned.